And welcome back to the Twins Wrap. Derek Hansen with you, along with the television voice of the Minnesota Twins, Dick Bremer. And Twins coming off a loss last night. Dick, it just seems like there's a weird, when the Twins lose, it's the same formula of getting a few runs early, then the pitcher for the other team settles down, then they can't overcome that, and they can't just hit that knockout blow.
Yeah, and for some reason it's happening more at home than on the road. The Twins have lost, 6 out of their last 7 home games, which is odd for a team with the fourth best record in baseball, but that's what happened last night. Twins looked like they were ready to knock Ivan Nova out early, and then Kyle Gibson had his typical one bad inning, and then the Twins were fighting from behind the rest of the way, and Nova found something that got him through the middle inning. So we'll see what happens tonight.
That is frustrating because Kyle Gibson, outside of a couple pitches, I thought actually pitched pretty well.
Yeah, one of the things I like to look at is, were there any, and if so, how many 1, 2, 3 innings, which gives you a pretty good barometer as to how much in control of the strike zone and how much in control of the game a pitcher was. And Kyle was, except in that third inning. A couple of singles here with 1 out and then 2 out and then a single and a home run and a really poor pitch to Abreu with John Jay in the on-deck circle, who has not hit a home run this year. My partner on the air last night, Roy Smalley, said, you really got to be careful with Abreu because he can hurt you, and he could hardly exhale, and Abreu had hurt Gibson. So one of those innings that Kyle wishes he could have back.
It's funny, the former Twins, they were on it last night because I was driving home, and Dan Gladden said almost the same thing. This guy's dangerous, and then Cookie right down the middle. So those guys have seen a few pitches in their life, and they called that one. That's one pitch you can't make to a guy like that.
Well, and first thing I do when I get to the ballpark is, as soon as the lineups are available, I write down the lineup in my score sheet. And so, okay, you got Garcia and then Abreu, and then you look at cleanup, John Jay, and I thought, well, now how many home runs has he hit? And he hadn't hit any, and I thought, well, what kind of protection does he give Abreu in the lineup? And why would anybody pitch to Abreu with the guy who's a fine singles hitter but no power at all? And then, wouldn't you know it, second time through the order, that situation comes up, and Gibson and the Twins didn't handle it particularly well, as based on the result, and wish they could have handled it differently.
Is that a situation where maybe the catcher and Gibson aren't on the same page? Where one of those things where they just maybe looking back on it, he maybe shouldn't have shaken him off. I don't know how that works. I mean, it's got to be a thing where both members of the battery are frustrated.
Well, I can only imagine, of course, what it's like to be on the mound in front of, we have 25,000 people there last night, a big viewing audience, big listening audience, and what it must be like to be behind the plate. But if you're catching, I can imagine you don't want the pitcher to throw anything that he's not going to throw with absolute conviction. So you make a suggestion, and if the pitcher shakes you off, well, okay, then he must feel differently about something. And you want, I'm sure of this, you want the pitcher to throw the pitch he believes in, not what you think should happen. And then you hope the results, support what ultimately the decision is. And I don't know, frankly, whether Gibson shook off Castro or not, but if he did, then obviously that was not the right choice.
No, that's for sure. Michael Pineda back tonight, and I thought his last outing was pretty good, and you mentioned this before in our conversations. He's been one of the most consistent pitchers since about June or so, it would be nice if he can get back in this groove. Yeah,
and the one thing he's done such an extraordinary job of is the one thing that Kyle Gibson did not do last night, and that is avoid the big inning. You look at Michael's starts, and they're usually, 5, 6 innings, 1 or 2 runs, maybe 3, but you don't see many 4 spots put up in his starts. And so, that's what the Twins are hoping for tonight. I think they feel that they should be able to score some runs tonight against the Chicago staff. And, if as long as you don't give up that big inning, I like the Twins' chances of winning again tonight.
It's interesting. You mentioned the big inning with Gibson, and then there were some longer innings too. And part of it's because I don't know what's happened since just a little bit before the All-Star break, but they're kicking the ball around a lot more. It's just, and they were so precise, I thought, defensively early in the season. but they have made some weird throws over to first base and just a few errors that they just shouldn't and normally don't have.
Well, yeah, it's averaging now lately about one error a game, and that's not good, and it's unlike what we saw the first 2 months of the year. So I don't know how you turn that around. Polanco's throws from short have been all over the place. Arise had a fairly routine ground ball, and he didn't field that. We've had errors in the outfield. It has not been championship caliber defensive play. I know that, and it's something that if the Twins are going to get in the playoffs, they're going to have to really tighten up.
Well, it's something Rocco Baldelli mentioned. He'd like to have rest. If you're going to take batting practice, go ahead. You don't have to. Infield, I mean, has there been more of an emphasis on that since we've seen them boot the ball around a little bit more?
Well, they'll take targeted fielding practice, I think is what they call it, before batting practice. Sometimes if there's an area that they feel needs to be addressed, well, then they'll have a player at that position working on things. But you brought up a good point, because now here we are getting into the back end of August, and soon we'll be in September. And this is the time of the year when this, making sure that the players get their rest, you don't overexert them early, in the hopes that come now with, 35, 40 games left to play, that the players are not fatigued, they won't get hurt, and they'll be sharper down the stretch because of it. So we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. So far, the results have been pretty encouraging. The Twins hitters survived the heat in Texas, scored a lot of runs in Texas, but now is when this new age thinking really, hopefully, will benefit the Twins, and the players, A, will stay healthy, and B, will be able to have as productive weeks at the end of the season that they did at the front of the season.
You mentioned the heat. I'm half Norwegian, half German, more or less. A little other things sprinkled in, I guess, if I'm going to be honest. But you and I were at Wrigley last year, some of the hottest weather I've ever been through when the Twins faced the Cubs. And I was there as a fan, and Max Kepler had to leave the game just not feeling right, and same thing the other day. So it's obvious I know why my ancestors moved to the upper Midwest here. They just don't like the heat.
Well, I've said it on the air, and I've told it to people privately. I would much rather have 20 below weather than what we had in Texas. And it's no small accomplishment to get through that series and not have a pulled hamstring. Kepler did have to come out of the game because of heat-related illness. Last year in Chicago, Eddie Rosario came out in the middle of an inning. Bobby Wilson almost passed out in the batter's box and had no recollection that he walked and later scored a run that inning after the game.
Wow.
It's a very dangerous thing. It's not something to be taken lightly. And the players, I can promise you, are just, and even the ones who are from the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico and Florida, wherever, I can promise you they're all just looking to survive the game. I don't think the quality of play is particularly good. I think in the late innings throughout the Texas series, we saw weariness and a lack of sharpness in the field during the at-bats on the mound. So, we're all ridiculed up here for playing baseball when the temperature's in the 30s, and that's an inconvenience, to be sure, with outdoor baseball here this time of the year. But it really is a serious health hazard to play baseball in that heat. And thankfully, at least in Texas, we won't be doing that again. They'll be moving into their new ballpark next year, and it's got a retractable roof. And they tell us air conditioning.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned it's a beautiful ballpark there that sadly is going to be torn down, but it is going to be a necessity, isn't it?
Well, that's the reason. I remember years ago when they were about ready to open that ballpark, I interviewed the team president and asked him about not having a roof on, joking about a Minnesotan coming down and having to sit in the heat. And he laughed and he said, well, for our fan experience, we wanted to have an open air ballpark and an open air experience for the fans. Well, that didn't last as long as he thought, because ultimately they're replacing a perfectly good ballpark with a brand new one simply because it didn't have a roof.
Let's talk a little bit about, it's kind of interesting. I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but there's been a lot of talk about the strike zone. You and I have talked about that quite a bit. And of course, your TV broadcasts have the little box there. And I know there's been criticism whether or not it's really, relates to the batter. If they're too tall, maybe it should be a little bit longer or whatever. but it certainly has been a moving strike zone again. What's your take on that? And we've had so much talk about the computer umpire out there, but do you think that they're looking over their shoulder a little bit too much as well?
I don't know, because they're graded on a system not identical to the one we use on TV, but very similar to it. They're graded, but all you have to do is look at the hitter's reactions and occasionally the catcher's reactions, because the one thing that the electronic strike zone that we use on TV, that the umpires are graded on, the players use that too to reinforce and refine their individual strike zone. And the last couple of games have been just awful, in my opinion, in terms of uniformity and consistency of the strike zone. And a player, I can promise you now, if they've been called out or within their at bat, a strike was called that they felt was a ball, they have the means and certainly the desire to check that almost immediately. And it confirms what their belief of the strike zone is. The umpires are graded on it, and it's not been good at all lately. And it's been bad for both teams. This isn't somebody complaining that the Twins lost to the White Sox last night because of a poor strike zone. It just really needs to get better. And with this technology, we're at the brink now where the umpires can't be helped any more than they're already being helped in terms of establishing what their grade was, what percentage of balls they called were balls and strikes, etc. So we can't take the next step until we go to the electronic strike zone. And my guess is what we've seen this year around baseball will make that happen sooner rather than later.
I'm glad you said that, because you've been very fair. There's a couple weeks ago, I think, where Kepler thought he was struck out and he got a ball, and you were actually pretty critical. So it's not like you and I are homers when we're talking about this, because I actually thought the White Sox got hosed on quite a few pitches that were strikes, but the Twins were beneficiaries of it.
Well, and then in Texas, Miguel Sano had 2 strikes in the zone, 2 pitches in the zone that he took. They were called balls, not strikes, and then he hits a home run. Well, that's not right, because there's a huge difference between 1-0 and 0-1, and there is a gargantuan difference when a hitter's standing up there and the count is 2-0 as opposed to 0-2. So my hope is that they go ahead and cross that threshold and get the electronic strike zone in sooner rather than later.
Speaking of the strike zone, one of the most profound things I've heard from anyone who's worked with you as the color analyst was Roy Smalley last week. And Kirby Puckett, my all-time hero, right? And I love the fact, because I thought he made the game better because he could hit bad balls and put him in play a lot. And I think you remember this, Smalley said, when I played with Puckett, I always thought, if I was a pitcher, I would try to walk him. Because why would you ever throw in the strike zone? I thought that was one of the most profound things ever to say about one of my favorite players ever.
Yeah, and then you have players though who, again, they have the benefit of looking at pitches and establishing a strike zone, and I think there are very much fewer undisciplined hitters in the game. Eddie Rosario's maybe the best example on the Twins. There are far fewer undisciplined hitters than there used to be, and then you have at the other extreme Luis Arraez, who seems to know what. From the moment the ball leaves the pitcher's hand, what the pitch is and where it's destined to end up behind home plate. So yeah, there are certain hitters out there. Vladimir Guerrero was one, Kirby was one, and now Rosario was one too, where why you would throw them a strike, I have no idea. Miguel Sano used to be that way, and that's one of the remarkable things what we've seen this year, the increased plate discipline by Sano, and what it's led to in terms of him being a threat in the box.
And both ways can be effective. Rosario 3 hits last night. Arraez 3 hits last night. That's the cool thing about baseball. There's different approaches that can work for a guy.
Yeah, and last night, a real oddity. The Twins had 15 hits and only 1 went over the fence. So we'll see if that changes tonight. This team's on the cusp of breaking the major league mark for home runs hit in a season. And they won Sunday in Texas without hitting a home run and had only 1 last night. So maybe they'll break out tonight.
Final thing for you, just looking at the bullpen, I think they're getting better. I think they're kind of getting the flow that they want to. They had a hiccup, and that happens every once in a while, and you're going to see that with the amount of runs that are being scored in Major League Baseball, though. We're not seeing those lockdown bullpens that we've seen during the Royals World Series year in Cleveland, right? I mean, it's just kind of one of those things right now where people are taking advantage of these bullpens that are maybe not as sturdy.
Well, and you get to the end of the year, and I think we'll see more and more of it. The bullpens relied on so much early on that at the end of the season, you'll see more bullpen explosions. And I made the comment last night on TV, the Twins added Dyson and Romo to their bullpen, and I think they're both great adds. But you look at the Atlanta Braves, they added 3 relievers, and for most of the time since the trade deadline, they've struggled, and the Braves at this point probably regret making at least one of those trades. But it's a problem throughout baseball when you demand or expect less from your starting pitching, and we've seen an ongoing trend of that in the game. There's no question about that. Well, then that puts more strain on the bullpens, and maybe in 2019 we're starting to see some of that wear and tear.
Yeah, I'm hoping that it settles down and we can get the pitching back. Because to be honest with you, these Big Ten football scores I don't like as much as a 3-2 game. It's getting a little bit too much. I know the research says that people like scoring, but I like a better flow of a game with the pitcher able to deal a little bit.
Well, and we had a couple of relatively low-scoring, close ball games on the road trip. Twins winning, a 4-3 ball game in Texas, and it's like, yeah, those are more fun for me because those are the types of games the Twins are going to play should they make the playoffs. If they're in the playoffs and they're matched up against the Houston Astros, well, they're not going to win 13-4. It's going to be one of those low-scoring games, and so if we're hopeful of the Twins team getting into the playoffs, the more often they can play those low-scoring games and pull them out by 1 or 2 runs, the better off they're going to be in October.
Well, it should be a good one tonight. Michael Pineda back on the hill. Dick, thanks so much. Enjoy your time tonight at Target Field.
You got it, Derek.
The Twins Wrap with Dick Bremer, brought to you by Jefferson Lions here on the Mighty 790 KFGO. That wraps up Couch Potato Radio. The pregame show with Corey Provis coming up.